All right, joining me is you know him, you love him, J. Miles Coleman. Welcome to the show, Miles.
Thanks for having me.
I want to get this started by just saying right up front, I became active on Twitter probably in the second year of existence of election Twitter. So I remember you from before you joined the Crystal Ball, and you were active with all the others like Drew Savicki and the others. But I also was I was an avid reader of the Crystal Ball all the way back in 2016. So, proud Crystal Ball reader for 8 years and still going strong. Why don't you tell a bit about yourself and kind of your journey through the political commentator universe?
Yeah, well, it's kind of funny because at UVA, one of the things we do is, the kind of crystal ball is part of the larger Center for Politics at UVA, and we do a number of other things. We have youth outreach program, we have a foreign outreach program, but we do offer classes as well for the UVA students as well, which I always like working with them. And one of my least favorite questions I like to get is, Miles, how did I become a political forecaster? Like, well, I can tell you what I did, but I'm really weird. But no, I'm originally from New Orleans, not from a super political family, although I will say one of the first things that kind of got me interested in politics is back when I was 9 or 10. There was a guy named Ray Nagin who was running for mayor of New Orleans. So this would be in 2002. My dad was a big fan of his. I'd be out, waving signs for him and walking with him, and he was kind of a reformer in a city that is not known for having the most pristine politics, shall we say. And as it turned out, we ended up moving to Charlotte, North Carolina, within the next year or so. But so we missed Hurricane Katrina, thankfully, by a few years. But anyway, Nagin got into some kind of trouble with contracts or something like that, public corruption, and he ends up being the only mayor in the history of the city of New Orleans to actually go to jail. So like I say, it was a good idea at the time. And really after that, I didn't think of I didn't think about politics for a while, until the '08 election. North Carolina it was funny because when we moved out of Louisiana, Louisiana is one of those places where, a lot of my relatives would not imagine living anywhere else. You just don't leave. And, I really hated it going to a new state. But I mean, it did help me politically because, North Carolina was like one of the closest states in the '08 election. The Obama campaign had a very strong ground game there. Kind of in the primary season, my dad again, got me interested in the whole campaign. He never was a fan of the Clintons, and by that time he was a lifelong Republican who had kind of gotten disillusioned with a Bush. Like Obama was his natural candidate, and so that's what got me interested in it. And really, I found out kind of quickly, yeah, I'm a Democrat. As one of my favorite elected officials, or former, I should say, at this point, as Claire McCaskill said, I'm a Democrat, but I'm not one of the crazy ones. But anyway, to her point, but okay, Obama won the election, okay, but I found out very quickly that I was more interested in like where Obama got his votes from, right? As opposed to, yes, I had some opinions on policy, but I found I liked more the horse race, geographic types. And I tell you, one of the probably the first time I ever did an electoral map is I remember my sister had a project. I'm guessing she was in middle school at about the time of the '08 election, and she had to do this project about the election, and she had to make this campaign booklet. And I remember coloring in an electoral map based on, okay, this is a safe McCain state, this is, a safe Obama state. These are the ones that are close. And also it's kind of and interesting considering where I wound up is like when I was in high school and college. I kind of, towards the end of the semester where I was trying to, okay, what should I study? What exams are going to be my kind of toughest? What courses can I kind of triage? Right? I would, like I would write, okay, well, history, likely A, social studies, lean B, I would do that type of handicapping. But so anyway, so I ended up going back to LSU for college. I think part of that was, like I missed stuff down there. And interestingly enough, I was an international, I was a double major in international studies and anthropology, with only a minor in poli sci. And for a lot of my coursework, the main focus was, basically international stuff in anthropology. And my very last semester of college, just sort of as a treat to myself, I took a course in Louisiana state government, and I just loved it. My professor, he's retired at this point, but we're still in contact. That really kind of got me. In fact, he wrote me a recommendation for my job I'm in now. So it's kind of funny how it happened like that. But I kind of joke that when all of the normal LSU students were, on a weekend, they'd be out tailgating or doing something like that. I'd be, in my dorm looking at Dave's redistricting map, or, looking over old election data. So, kind of in a way it paid off eventually, but, I was kind of weird. But it's I would say, in '08, I did follow the presidential race, but not really the down ballot races as much. But 2010 was the first cycle where I looked kind of, because there was no presidential race that year. So, I started looking more at, Congress, governors, and that kind of got me kind of acquainted with, okay, these are the different pollsters. These are, this is a good candidate, this is a bad one. And really it was a nice little education, because obviously the like elections on the whole didn't end up like I wanted to, like how I would have liked them to have. But it was a good education in that, how fast stuff can change, because '08 being a big Obama year, going to 2010, which was not that. So that was a nice little education there. I graduated LSU in 2014, and like it's funny because the every race where I was there was super boring. You had David Vitter being reelected in 2010. You had Bobby Jindal being reelected in a landslide in 2011. In 2014, you could see the kind of writing on the wall that Mary Landrieu was going to be in trouble. But you know what? As soon as I left, that's when they elected John Bel Edwards. I'm like, shit, I wish I could have been there for that election, right? But it's kind of funny because I always wanted to be an intern on the Hill. I saw that as, for whatever reason, like the most obvious path to working in politics. And it kind of sucked because I didn't really have the connections that I have now. And I applied to be an intern with Mary Landrieu and Kay Hagan, who was one of my favorite senators. I can't kind of go through a background of my kind of political life without saying Kay Hagan was one of the biggest influences on me. Back when I first got into like precinct map, and I'd bring her, she had did this thing where every Wednesday, when Congress was in session, she would have coffee and donuts per constituent. So sometimes at the NEC, I'd print her off maps. I think I have one up here, and she had like signed maps that I made of her election with Elizabeth Dole, and kind of she ended up dying like the first month or so I was hired. So it's just like, I had to kind of I had to kind of shut my door and have a moment. But anyway, so I could never really break into that world. And I had an uncle who had been an FBI agent for a while, basically ever since I was born. And he's like, well, heads up, we have internships with the FBI. And I applied and I got it. And I like that because, as it happened, one of my roommates that summer was an intern on the Hill. Um, and he would tell me, okay, well, lots of donors' kids are here. We have this one girl who shows up every day. She stuffs envelopes. She leaves at 3:30. And then when she leaves, we have a machine that does her job that we just put the envelopes into. So, contrast that to on my first day of being with the FBI, they like take us all to the Hoover building in downtown DC, and they say, okay, well, we got something like 10,000 people who applied for this, and we only picked you 200 people or something like that. It was like maybe 200 of us. So I'm like, okay, that's nice. I earned it. I think my uncle kind of pushed people along in the process, but he didn't earn it for me. I earned that. And so basically, where I'm going with this is, I was with the FBI for a year or so. Then I became a defense contractor in Northern Virginia for a while, but my mind was always on politics. And every time, as I'm sure a lot of our listeners would know, every time we had a special election or a midterm or anything like that, I had a lot of like Wednesdays where I would go into the office Wednesday with no sleep because the election was on Tuesday, and you know, I did do, you know, I did do a few kind of freelance things here and there, but it wasn't really enough, with like my maths to sustain an income. And someone who I give a lot of credit to is Sean Trende of Real Clear Politics, and he's been a friend of mine for several years. And like I would tell him, I kind of remember talking to him in 2018 and just saying how frustrating it was because look, I kind of live, eat, and breathe this whole shit of politics and elections, but it's so hard to break in. And he's like, Miles, look, I promise you, I kind of started writing in kind of the first decade of the 2000s where like Nate Silver was the whole big craze. And, I felt like I would never get picked up. He's like, Miles, okay, someone will eventually pick you up. And sure enough, in late 2018, this job at the Center for Politics opened up, and I applied for it, and I ended up getting it. And I think a big part of it was that, you know, other than writing the crystal ball, which is me and Kyle Kondik, Dr. Sabato is like the most quoted professor in the whole country when it comes to like politics. We have this kind of constant stream of reporters who are asking to talk with him, and he can't take all of that, so he ends up bouncing it down to us. And well, some of those reporters who we deal with had already, kind of knew who I was from following me on Twitter. So I think that helped. So it all kind of came together like that. And, I think kind of one of the takeaways from my story is that, like I tell some of my interns this as well, is, just because you don't get the one internship that you think you need, it's not the end of the world. So there's other stuff out there. And, so that's kind of the kind of quick version in terms of how I got here right now. But yeah, it's oh, and I think what was helpful is, well, not help, one of the things I kind of liked is so they kind of hired me in mid 2019, and one of the first few races that we had to handicap was the Louisiana governor race in 2019. And There were some spots for John Bell where it was looking a little dicey, but at the end we had it as leans Democrat, and we ended up being right. So I'm like, okay, at least I know my home state well. One of my best friends in politics, he's on Twitter pretty often, as well as is a pollster named John Kuvion, and we're always talking. He's the type of person where if he's actually based in in Rouge, and maybe a few times a year, make the trip to New Orleans to go see my family, but every time I go, I have to make the trip up to Baton Rouge, and where I mean, really, if you get me and John together, like we've had times where, we've been kicked out of restaurants because we've been talking so long. So anyway,
Yeah, no, the restaurants in my hometown probably instituted the 90-minute time limit for people like you.
and guess what? So, like, one of the first few times we met was he had some function in DC, and I kind of took the metro in to go see him. And DC, lots of places close early there. So, we were looking for, like, I think we kind of ended up eating like two or three restaurants by the whole time it got over. So,
So I'm glad you gave that whole backstory because you taught me and many of us probably what a lot of what we didn't know about you. Because what I know about you is you're the election commentator, you're the guy with the pretty maps, and you're the guy who's obsessed with both East Jefferson Parish and Robeson County, North Carolina.
oh yes,
Um,
yes. So,
so and actually I remember asking you about East Jefferson Parish back, when Eddie Risponi just barely, we're talking like
few
double
votes.
digit number of votes won
Yeah.
that area. And then I think Trump underperformed there by historic standards in 2020. These are two areas though of the country that really fascinate you from everything that I've seen in your writing and on your tweets because they're politically anomalous in many ways.
Yeah, and like I would say too, like they've kind of been going in opposite directions as well. I mean, I think by this point, Robeson County is a solid Republican county. Probably wouldn't be so surprised if like it was what 60-40 for Trump roughly in 2020. I wouldn't be surprised if he improves on that next time. Even some of the even some of the kind of Democrats who have a decent brand there, like Secretary of State Delane Marshall is a name I'm going to kind of drop, who talk about her a lot. Even someone like her couldn't carry it in 2020. East Jefferson Parish to me is, it's I kind of so I grew up in a neighborhood of New Orleans called Lakeview, which is kind of right on the line between Orleans Parish proper and East Jeff. So I spent a lot of time there. Um, and it is one of those areas that is trending Democratic longer term, but maybe not as fast as definitely not as fast as maybe some of the other suburbs like in Atlanta
Right.
or Texas or what have you. I think part of that is I think in Louisiana there's an extra, or at least in New Orleans proper, there is an extra layer of, I think it has to do with the Catholicism there that
Yeah.
keeps it a little more Republican, and so I think that I think 2020 was the first time since I'm going to say the 1960s where Jefferson Parish as a whole was more Democratic than Louisiana. So it's getting there slowly, but it's kind of fun. Like I'm from at least on my mom's side, I'm from a big Italian family, and the my kind of cousins and aunts and uncles who are left there, vote as you would expect. So, I kind of joke that I'm a centrist Democrat. When like I'm on Twitter, I look like I'm Joe Manchin next to everyone on Twitter, but when I go back home, I look like I'm Elizabeth Warren next to kind of those guys. But
Right.
yeah, two very, very interesting regions.
Yeah, so what you guys are seeing on screen right now is a map that I drawn. Basically, if we were not if Louisiana and other states in the South became unmoored from the Civil Rights Act, what would I want these districts to look like? So you notice I have a pretty solidly Democratic seat right over here in New Orleans and parts of Monterey. This seat right here is also pretty close. It's Baton Rouge. So in fact, I can even bring the stats up right here. Because I was actually really curious to know, like, could you draw a compact seat in Louisiana that's centered on New Orleans? It isn't, it's plurality white, so it's probably illegal under the current law, but this is kind of my idea of what a standard map in a southern state would look like.
So is that green one in the middle? Is that all one seat?
Yeah, that is. It's kind of a leftover district. Like this fifth
Okay.
one is kind of Shreveport all across the north, parts of the Black Belt here. And this district is kind of I believe Lafayette and more Cajun country. This so you kind of this is kind of just leftover from what couldn't be taken in the other districts. But how
Okay.
would you grade the map like this?
I would say, in terms of how I would draw it myself, you know, I like what you did in the Southwest. I try to keep the Southwest together if I can. Uh, it's like it's not the worst I've seen. I'll say that.
All right.
Not to kind of I would, basically when I draw LA1, I try to give it basically whatever parts of the coast that I don't use in LA 3. I'm used to saying 7, it's the old 7, but so I would kind of take that green district basically more into, like, instead of the coast, I would bring it more kind of along the Mississippi border, like in parishes like Washington, Tangipahoa. Those are called the Florida parishes,
Right.
and
And maybe the
kind of how
Shreveport
it is on the kind of current map.
and maybe the
But
Shreveport seat would come more south rather than across here.
yeah, well, I will tell you also that, like, historically, there's been a lot of opposition from the kind of residents of Shreveport and Monroe about being in the same seat. They just don't like that for whatever reason. So,
All right. I sorry, I just had to show everybody that.
oh no, that's fine.
Yeah, so I mean, I have some questions about various elections that have taken place like over the course of like some of those states you've mentioned. Like North Carolina, for example, it went blue back in 2008. Prior to that, it was pretty solidly Republican state. Now it's kind of a swing state or battleground state. It's just one that Democrats seem to keep falling short in. It's of top of interest of mine to me this year because of the governor's race. This to me feels like a repeat of Shapiro versus Mastriano in terms of the dynamics of the race. You would agree?
Yeah, it's. I mean, we officially, for ratings purposes, we have it as a toss up. So I'm gonna kind of toe the company line there, but I think, if you look at the resumes of the two candidates, yes, I mean, I think that is, and the other day I was talking to one of my contacts who kind of non-partisan, and he's like, well, under Anderson Cooper, not not Anderson Clayton, I'm sorry, the chair of the state party. I was thinking of Roy Cooper. The
Um,
Democrats are
I was gonna say, doesn't
like,
he doesn't he pronounce it Roy Cupper from what I hear?
yes, yes, yes. They were telling me, like, under her, like, the state Democratic Party is about as organized as it's been since '08. So we'll see if that makes a difference. But yeah, it's a state where, I mean, just over I kind of joke with people like, yo, I mean, I've just had my heart broken by this state so much over the past 10 years, but it's the only state we missed on our 2020 forecast.
Right.
And it is, something I always talk about. North Carolina is, yes, there is a lot of younger people and new residents in places like, Charlotte, the Research Triangle, even parts of Western North Carolina as well. But you've also seen an influx of retirees along the coastal areas who are voting Republican. So the kind of in migration into the state hasn't been like uniformly good for
Right.
Democrats.
Yeah.
But I think that said, North Carolina isn't really a stranger when it comes to splitting its ticket between president and governor either, right?
Yeah.
So
I would say like a big question for me is like the thing that's going to swing North Carolina blue permanently is, do you see it the margin in Union County narrow up? If that happens, I think North Carolina is gone for the Republicans. But so far that hasn't happened yet.
right, no, it's not just you, and it's Johnson as well, kind of out in the Raleigh area is, that's the probably one of the good points that Drew makes is like, and he's another one we talk pretty often, almost every day, and he's like, well, compared to Georgia, North Carolina doesn't have like a truly like 100% suburban county like a Cobb or a Gwinnett. Like instead you have these, exurban suburban counties of Johnston, Union, Randolph, even like Gaston, Iredell that, are still 60% plus Republican counties.
Yeah, and as long as that margin, I think, holds up, like I said, I'd say Republicans are a modest favorite in North Carolina. Although I will point out, in 2022, I believe North Carolina was only R plus 0.4 compared to the nation as a whole.
Yeah. And it's really funny because if you think of Sherry Beasley, one of the reasons why the Democrats wanted to run her is because she wasn't just not another kind of white guy. And there was some thinking that she could kind of animate the kind of African American kind of turnout there. And I always, I don't. I always have to be careful because I don't want to sound like I'm blaming any certain group for an election outcome. But if you look at black turnout, especially in the kind of rural parts of the state, and within the city of like Charlotte itself, like it was like 2010 or 2014. But her gains, those kind of Trump era gains in the suburbs of places like Wake and Mecklenburg, they did basically hold up.
Yeah, I mean, Sherry Beasley, despite losing by 3 points, she held on to New Hanover County. I was not
That's right.
expecting her to do that.
Yeah, yeah. So,
Yeah.
yep,
Exactly. I guess jumping around, I guess it's interesting to compare North Carolina to the state that I'm currently living in, which is Georgia. People often compare these states because they vote similarly, but people point out that North Carolina like is only 20% African American, I believe. Georgia's
yeah,
30% African American, so that's a big difference.
yeah,
Um,
yeah. That, yeah.
and
And something I've said is, this sounds like it's almost dumb to say, but it makes sense. It's like Georgia has less coastline, so it's less attractive to retirees who are looking for beachfront property. So,
right,
there's
is
that as well.
is that why like places like Myrtle Beach have kind of like become solidly Republican? Because
Oh,
I've always assumed that any touristy area would be trending Democratic, but I was wrong about that, and
no, it's broadly true, but not, it's in fact, I was looking at one of the kind of other plugs I'll make for myself is I'm the author of a book called America Votes, the 35th edition. And one of the things I did for this is like for every state, I did just what's mostly data, but for kind of every state, I write up some of my observations. Is They're not directly related to this, but for the Carolina part, is if you look at 2010, uh, basically I found that that kind of Erie County was like if you rank every county in South Carolina from most votes cast to least in 2010, Erie County was number 10. I'm saying this off the top of my head, so don't totally quote me on it. But I think by 2022, it had moved up to number 3. So it's just insane population kind of growth there.
Right. And I guess one of the places that I'm actually personally gonna be, I have like this list of counties that voted for Trump by like 7 points or less. These are like also Democratic trending, and one of them is Fayette County, Georgia. These are counties I'm looking at. These are on flip watch for me. Also Hamilton County, Indiana, maybe
Yep.
less so Delaware County, Ohio, and Spotsylvania County, Virginia. I think maybe less so, but definitely Douglas County, Colorado is another example. These are all counties I'm looking at that could flip, given, you know, I th I think also, there was a while when Biden was really underperforming that was probably really in doubt, but now with the current polling between Harris and Trump, I think that's very much a possibility.
Like I kind of remember watching in 2022 the runoff in Georgia. Like it wasn't until those last few votes came in that Fayette ended up voting for Walker by like a point or so, but for
Yeah.
barely there, almost.
Yeah, that's why it's kind of top for me. But also don't sleep on Hamilton County, Indiana as well.
Yeah, yeah.
And again, like I said, personally, I don't think Harris is going to win Delaware County, Ohio. I think JD Vance might give just enough of a boost for Trump to hold on there. Um, but again, there's it's hard to tell this far out, but it doesn't really help that rally Trump gave the other day where he kind of trash talk the most popular Republican in the state of Georgia.
Yeah, yeah. It's actually one of the sign maps I have, basically kind of with Kay Hagan, she started the tradition of every time I know I'm going to see an elected official ahead of time, I'll go print out the map of their election, I'll have blah, 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 and sign it. But back in April, we had our 25th anniversary party at the Center for Politics, and one of our guests was Brad Raffensperger, and I made a map of his 2022 primary. I'm like, okay, sir, I need you to sign this for me. This was a awesome election.
Right. If you can't divulge this information yet, that's fine. But since Harris took over the Democratic campaign, are there any ratings that the crystal ball's been taking a second look at since that decision?
I would say generally, to me, Harris sort of reset everything, or at least the general dynamics of the race to kind of as it was before the debate, roughly speaking.
Right.
Since then we have moved several ratings into Trump's favor. So I would say, just look at, I would say to our listeners, without really giving away anything, just kind of because like before the debate, we had the same electoral map for at least a year. So kind of compare that to where we are now, and you look at what states have changed. Maybe those would be some of the good candidates.
Right. And I think the assumption, I think a lot of my friends is that before Biden dropped out, it was going to be that trio of Pennsylvania, Michigan, Wisconsin that was, if Biden was going to win, that would be his path. Now, I think Harris opens up a more of a path through Georgia, Arizona, North Carolina, Nevada. But because I think the polling there has been looking better for her in those states than it ever looked for Biden.
Yeah, and that's even before the debate. One of the persistently, the Rust Belt seemed like it was consistently better for Biden than the Sun Belt. My kind of prior, not to disagree with you, but I'm still thinking that the most obvious path is still through the Rust Belt. Basically win the three blue wall states plus the second district of Nebraska. But I do think Harris is at least maybe a better fit for some of those Sun Belt states than Biden was.
Right. And I think a big part of this is going to depend on who Harris's running mate is. And as of the time we're recording this, we still don't know who that's going to be.
That's right.
Maybe, yeah, someone sh like Shapiro might provide her strength in the Rust Belt. If she goes with someone like Mark Kelly, that might be a double down on the Sun Belt. So it's going to be, there's a lot of unknowns.
Yes.
But I I want to take a bit of a break here. We're gonna reset here, and then we're gonna maybe talk a little bit more about some of the elections across the rest of the South, because that seems to be your period of area of expertise. So, when we come back, we're gonna talk a little bit more about some elections that have taken place across the South. All right, we are back with J. Miles Coleman. So, when we were before we were talking about, states that are going to be competitive this year in the South, like North Carolina and Georgia. But I want to take a look at some of the very interesting elections that have taken place over the past few years in some of the other Southern states. The first one I want to look at is the 2017 Alabama special Senate election, because I think that was like a wow result for a lot of people. Like, because I think even going into that, like even with how bad the Roy Moore was, like I think the polling had him at like up 2 points. So I think the conventional wisdom that he was going to pull it out, so that when he didn't, that I think probably pleasantly surprised a lot of people.
Yeah. It's my kind of prior was basically what polling was that basically Roy Moore is going to win by 2, 3 points maybe, but I mean Jones won by almost 2 points in Alabama, and I mean kind of my story on that election is this was when I was still a defense contractor. Um, and I was following that election that night, and kind of before I started with the crystal ball, I was a regular volunteer with Decision Desk HQ. In fact, I was one of the first back in the early days where it just was just a bunch of us nerds on a spreadsheet. In fact, I was the only Democrat out of the original group. It's nice to see how much they've kind of grown, and but like again, anyway, I remember that night, because in Alabama is one of those states that still, at least in terms of reporting elections, there are some states that are great about it. There are some states that are still kind of in the dark ages. I think Alabama is a little in in that latter category. But at DDHQ that night, we had some of our volunteers were posting precinct level data into the spreadsheet for some of the larger counties. And me just being me, I started breaking down the race by congressional district, and I put like because Alabama has 7 seats. I put out data for like the first five or so, and I'm almost to the end. And one of the people in my comments says, "Oh well, Miles, based on what you're posting, it looks like Doug Jones is going to only win with one district." I'm like, "Holy shit, you're right!" I mean, like I didn't even realize that off the kind of top, and I'm like, "Oh my god!" And as it turned out, Jones was very close to carrying the fifth district, which is a Huntsville area. Kind of depending how you split a precinct, you could have argued for either candidate, which I hate. Kind of won that seat, but in most of the scenarios I ran, I ended up with more carrying it, so that's what I was going to go with. But yeah, he just got a big margin out of District 7, and so I kind of do my work. I kind of put everything out there that morning. And of course, as is frequently the case, went into work that Wednesday, almost no sleep. So there were really two nice prizes for me that day. So in the morning, one of the counties that we did not have precinct data for that I wanted it for was Etowah County, which is
Roy Moore's
that's the
home county.
Roy Moore's home county where the mall that he got banned was. And so I sent an email that morning to the county clerk asking if they had precinct results nicely. And, I go out to my car because with the kind of work I was doing, I couldn't have my phone. I had no internet access. So I'd have to periodically go out to my car and check. So sure enough, I get a response from the Etowah County clerk, and Roy Moore, she gives me all the precinct data, and like he loses that precinct like 3-1 of the mall where he got banned. I tweaked that, and that was a popular one. And so I get
I'm
home from.
Yeah, I was gonna say I'm guessing that particular part of Gadsden has a large African American population. That probably played a bit
Could
of
be.
a yeah.
Could be. I don't know off the top of my head, but that was the location of the mall, I guess. So that
Yeah.
that that was a big part. But like anyway, so I get home about maybe 6 or 7 p.m. from work that day, and of course, I just kind of crash for a few hours. And I check my phone, like I wake up at like 11:30, and I check my phone. One of my followers kind of sends me a screenshot. Oh, Miles, well, on the Rachel Maddow show, they use your map of Alabama showing Doug Jones only winning one district. I'm like, oh, so well,
Yeah.
that's been the kind of coolest experience, one of the coolest experiences I've had so far.
Oh, although I will say that that district that Doug Jones won, that wasn't the biggest swing. I believe that honor goes to the sixth, the Shelby County based seat,
That
which
was
I
going to
believe
be my guess.
yeah, that district I believe swung 38 points against the Roy Moore.
Sounds
Uh,
right off the top of my head. I mean, it was basically what, like 70% Trump, and Roy Moore only carried it by like 5 or 6. So that sounds right. And yeah, like I do remember like the District 7 went from like 70-30 Clinton up to like 80-20 Jones. And and like it was funny because I was tweeting one of the I had one of the counties mixed up from District 1 and 5. So I'm like, oh shit, if that changes the whole calc. So thankfully it didn't. So uh yeah, so that was a fun experience. But yeah, it's I mean, it was amazing that Doug Jones was able to pull that election off. Like he was always, of course, in my mind, he was always an underdog for re-election. It's not like he was trying to, it's not like he was exactly running as Joe Manchin, right? So,
right. Before I ask, because I want to talk a little bit about Virginia for a little while, but I have to ask about that map right behind you because I'm wondering, in what election are Democrats even winning Western Ohio, much less by the margins that your map is showing?
yeah, so this is actually, do you know about the Dave Leap's election atlas? Uh, so that's a site that I'm always on. So this is actually you. Oh, sorry. This is actually using the atlas colors, with red for Democrats and blue for the
Oh
Republicans.
yeah.
So this is actually the guy who got me into like precinct township level mapping years ago was a guy or is a guy named Chris Kemp, and he did this map of kind of the Northeast by township, and he printed up for me, and yeah, so I just thought it was always a really kind of cool map. The one that's on this side behind me, this is a unified map of Virginia in the 2018 election. So, what's important about this, or like what I think is really cool about this one, is both Tim Kaine and Joe Manchin signed it. So, yeah, I think that's a cool,
Yeah.
kind of cool one as well.
I would imagine, given that how well Joe Manchin and Tim Kaine did, that that's a very Democratic state we're looking at that year.
Yeah, and Act, actually, someone asked me to do the math on this, and yeah, it's overall, I think the Democrats won the two-party vote by like it's basically it's a little work because Tim Kaine won by 16 points, so it's about that because West Virginia was close. So, but yeah, this is probably this is probably the last time we're going to see a Democratic win in West Virginia in a while, right?
Yeah.
So.
Well, let's talk about Virginia for a while because we talked about North Carolina and Georgia, kind of these traditionally Republican states in my lifetime that have now come back sort of into the competitive column and have gone Democratic at least once in the last 16 years. But Virginia has kind of taken a bigger swing to the left. And I would argue a big part of that is the Nova suburbs. That's really kind of because I someone actually did a map of Virginia minus Nova, and Trump still wins that state in 2016. So a big part of it, I think, has been the Nova swing.
It is, and I think that's part of where being a defense contractor, that kind of gave me an appreciation for, okay, well, and like I will say, once I left the FBI, I didn't realize just how big that world was of firms who do government work or work with the intelligence community or the armed services. It's a big part of the economic pie there. And when you have a president who comes along and talks about draining the swamp, well, guess what? That's your livelihood. Of course, you're not going to react well if there. That said, it hasn't been. I do think Northern Virginia gets a lot of the attention, but so I started dating my girlfriend last year, who's very apolitical. And at first, when we first met, she used to live in Richmond, and of course, me, I try to get acquainted with, okay, what do the like I tried to politically study the Richmond area a bit more, and basically, if you take like I guess this would be Senate District 16, which is kind of the western part of Henrico County, basically short pump. That used to be a pretty solidly Republican area. Now it's a double-digit Democratic type area. I mean, every time we go back there, they're like always building like a new, new like apartment complex or something like that. The suburbanization is spreading out, so I do agree with you that Northern Virginia is a lot of it, but it's not all of it.
Right. There's also Richmond, and places like that. You were mentioning how in 2017, like, because I remember a tweet on the 2017 election when it became clear that Ralph Northam was going to win by a huge margin, much larger than expected. I think there was expectations of a competitive race and possibility of a Republican upset. And then when Ed Gillespie lost by 9 points, I think that was a bit of a shock. But then we saw seat after seat in the House of Delegates drop for to the Democrats. And I think I will never forget this. The Democrats were a lottery draw away from a
Right.
tie.
Yeah. And like, yeah, who also got, he didn't get to start that election, but someone who us really started working with that election was Chaz Nuttycombe.
Yeah.
And Chaz, back when I was working with DDHQ kind of as a volunteer, he kind of got paired up with me because he wanted to like help us, which was awesome because he had a lot of state expertise even then. And like I remember I think the Democrats needed to pick up like 17 seats or something like that to get a majority. And he's like, okay, well, if it's a disappointing night, the Democrats pick up, 5 seats. If it's a good night, they pick up, 10. If it's a tsunami night, they pick up 15 or something. So like he had all these, kind of tiers of, and I just remember Chaz texting me on election night 2017. Oh my God, this candidate won, this candidate won, just kind of nonstop. So, yeah, that was an interesting election. And one of the things we did at DDHQ is we looked at I think we looked at elections going back statewide elections in Virginia going back to like 2012 or 11, probably 2012, where we had so many of these bellwether precincts located throughout the whole state. And well, yeah, like it was clear that it was not going to be a close race.
Yeah.
And one thing I will say is what I think fed into a lot of that angst on the Democratic side going into the election is actually my first assignment ever with DDHQ was in 2014, and they gave me, they put me in charge of entering data for Virginia, and of course, I thought, okay, it's gonna, why? It's gonna be such a snoozer. No, no one's gonna care about Virginia. And until Northern Virginia came, like until Fairfax came in, it's like, oh shit, Mark Warner could actually lose this. So I think there were a lot of Democrats who were spooked from maybe 2014, thinking that okay, Gillespie's a strong closer, right?
Yeah. I mean, I think that you're right that there was that expectation. 'Cause I remember Gillespie from 2014. I wasn't as tuned into the whole first of all, I don't think political Twitter even existed back then, or election Twitter, but I remember that election and how close it was. I remember it took days at least the network I was watching, it took days to call that race.
Oh yeah,
Um,
and it's I kind of remember one of the things I was watching just like I was watching Mark Warner's like the election night party, and of course it was taking them longer than they would have wanted to, make a definitive statement about the election. And like I remember, I just think this was funny. So Tim Kaine gets up to speak to the crowd at Mark Warner's election night party, and he says, "Well, this is looking like a Tim Kaine type of a race because
right?
Warner had just won by a big landslide in '08, and Kaine usually had, he was usually the one who had those kind of closer races."
Right. But then we fast forward back to 2021, and I have to say that if you had shown me a map 7 years ago where the Republicans down by 15 in Prince William, down by 15 in Henrico, down by 10 in Loudoun, I would have said they would have lost. That was Glenn Youngkin's margins of defeat in those counties. He won anyway, and he actually did worse than Ken Cuccinelli in both Richmond and Nova, and also in Charlottesville, and he was still able to pull out the win.
Yeah, and one of the stories I tell is after that election, I got a question from one of the Washington Post reporters who was asking about how Youngkin did with the evangelical vote, and I think people put a little less stock in exit polls these days, just because early voting is such a big thing. It might be a little harder to get an accurate sample, so I was trying to figure out how to kind of quantify that. And as it happens, like within the last year, I think it was Public Religion Research Institute to put out what they called their like religious landscape map. And for every county in America, they gave you their estimate of what percent Catholic or Protestant, like evangelical, is this county. And I looked at this, I'm like, okay, this is interesting. So as it turns out, according to these guys, there are 13 localities in Virginia that are a majority white evangelical by composition. And I looked at turnout. I'm like, okay, well, statewide, if you look at 2017 to 2021, statewide turnout was about like up 25%. But if you just looked at those 13 white evangelical counties in southwestern Virginia, turnout was up more like 35%. So I'm like, that's how he won. It was just really good turnout from those usually Republican areas.
Right.
Of course, yes, there was some, and like I thought it was interesting as well. Like to your point, he did have a little bit of persuasion in the suburbs as well. But I kind of used to when I was a defense contractor, I lived in Loudoun County, and I remember like in 2013, it was only McAuliffe plus 4 or 5. He won it by 10. In 2021, so. longer term still shifted blue, to your point.
Right. Although there was one exception, to a major exception, which was the Hampton Roads area. You know, the Norfolk, Portsmouth, Newport News, Hampton, also Virginia Beach. You know, those areas. These are areas where Glenn Youngkin actually did better than Ken Cuccinelli. And
And I think part,
yeah. I was like wondering, like that particular anomaly. Is it? I figured maybe I kind of had a conversation with Rachel Bidekoffer about this, and it's that the I think that particular metro area is less college educated than Richmond and Nova is.
that's part of it. Yeah, I mean, you really don't need a college degree to work for the Navy, right? But also one of the things that Chaz would point out uh, is that one of the knocks against the Democrats in 2021 is that was an all Northern Virginia ticket. If you look at the Republican side, all three of the statewide candidates had some connection to that area. So I think that's probably something that helped a little.
Right. So I mean, it's very fascinating to kind of see those I think that that's what led some people to think that 2022, 2023 was going to be even worse, but Democrats for the most part held on. They won the statewide popular vote by 3 points in 2022. They flipped the Virginia legislature in 2023. So you'd probably say we're looking at a similar margin to 2020 this year. Is that what we're the baseline?
Maybe a little less, but it's I would say something in between 2016 and 2020 is my kind of expectation. Biden was the first Democrat to carry Virginia Beach since LBJ. So, is
Right.
Harris going to be able to hold on to an area like that? We'll see. But it's I would say also that one of the yes, it was definitely a like it was billed as a setback for Youngkin that he lost both of the chambers of the legislature last year. But to me, kind of one of the silver linings for the Republicans is the Democrats only got a bare majority in both chambers, so it's not like they have this huge mandate. But that said, I think it's going to be a hard. It's funny because you kind of have a Trump campaign talking about chasing states like New Mexico and Virginia and Minnesota. It's like I kind of see them falling into the same trap that like Hillary did in 2016, where there was all kinds of talk about planning these states that went heavily Trump, right?
Right. So I want to quickly move on because I want to talk about a couple more states. We kind of alluded to West Virginia a little bit, talking about Manchin's victory and how he might be the last one in a while. I want to talk about a similar state, Kentucky, where Andy Beshear, won re-election in 2023. There's a particular result I want to zero in on, which is Elliott County, which actually swung pretty hard to the right. I think Bashir only won it by 6 or 7 points.
Yeah.
And actually remember saying to Eric Cunningham at the time, he is going to be the last Democrat to win Elliott for a while based on that result.
Yeah, he could. I mean, I think what really helped him in 2019 and to a decent extent in 2023 was a big surrogate for him was Rocky Adkins, who was state representative for that area for a while, and to me it kind of reminds me of some parts of Louisiana where just you have these, yellow dog Democrats dying off, and the younger generation, who have kind of come of age in our current system, they're partisan Republicans now. At least or at least tend to be more of that. So, you basically have a generation of voters who were, who may remember Franklin Roosevelt or LBJ. They're dying off, and they're, one of the kind of personal anecdotes I tell often is, my grandparents, they have been voting Republican for president probably since the 80s. But they remember, Hale Boggs and Earl Long and those Democrats. So their attitude is more vote for the a person. And their generation, that's if like if you compare them to like my mom's sisters who came of age under Reagan, and the face of the Democratic Party was Edwin Edwards, who was corrupt. And so they're more loyally Republican. So, whereas my grandparents might vote for John Bell Edwards, not as much the younger people in my family. I think that's probably something that's going on also in a place like Elliott County, Kentucky.
Right. And I was gonna bring this full circle, to talk about Louisiana at the end. You kind of answered my questions about like why after J John Bel Edwards was able to pull out those wins with those very different coalitions. 4 years later, that was a rough election for Democrats in 2023. And I think that election is the source of some overconfidence among some Republicans that Trump's going to do very well with black voters because in 2023, Louisiana Republicans did very well with black voters, particularly in the North.
Yeah, and I kind of think it was a case of just the Democrats not really trying, obviously, as hard as they had in some of the past cycles. There's been some kind of drama as well within the kind of state party there. So, I just think that it wasn't. They were just not trying their hardest. So yeah, it's
Yeah.
it's and I think maybe a little counter to that is, that in Mississippi, I think one of the things I was watching going into the kind of 2023 elections with Louisiana kind of out of the way is, I expected Reeves to win by a bigger margin than by Bashir, but that wasn't the case. So, I think Presley did a better job than Jim Hood did in 2019 of turning out the African American vote.
Yeah, that was an interesting thing to watch. Now, I want to, with the time we got left, I want to talk about a duo of states that we haven't touched on yet, and that is Florida and Texas. Florida, I think, really made news because it was one of the few states in 2020 that swung to the right, and then in 2022, I believe DeSantis and the other Republicans put up the best margin for Republicans in Florida, I think, since 1988.
That sounds right.
Yeah, so but Texas, believe it or not, swung the other way. I mean, it got more Republican, but in 2022 you had a bit of a first, which was that Texas voted to the left of Florida. The Republicans in Texas won on average by like 10 to 12 points. In Florida it was like 15 to 20 points. That is actually something I think might hold this year.
Yeah, it's kind of funny because one of the I've actually thought about that a bit because like if you look at the presidential elections, we had the last time Michigan voted to the right of Wisconsin, I think was 88, or at least one in the past few times. And also Florida voted more Republican than Texas was also 1988. So, not, I don't know if I buy that comparison of the kind of Midwestern states, but yeah, I could kind of see that happening with Florida and Texas as well. I mean, really, if you look at, we touched on this a little with North Carolina. I would say the kind of Democrats in the state have a little bit of a Florida problem, as I've kind of called it, because you have those wealthy, or those conservative retirees who are moving there. Texas, to me, the kind of growth is being driven more by the suburban areas, kind of like you have in Georgia. A lot of, not all of it, but a lot of the Republican vote is really banked in those rural areas, which either aren't growing or are stagnant. That said, I don't really, I think for us forecasters, um, it's funny because the Democrat in me wants a blue Texas, wants a competitive Texas. The forecaster in me doesn't, because once Texas is a true swing state, which I don't think it's going to get there until maybe a few more cycles, but once it is, it's going to be a pain in the ass for us forecasters, because if you look at the electoral votes it had, that like if you miss Texas, you could miss the whole election, right?
Right. So I mean, well, that's gonna put some interesting work on your hands whenever that happens. We're out of time, but I wanted to so thanks for coming on. I want to give you a chance to plug any place where people want to follow, or where you're active, and just plug anything.
Yeah, so if you go to centerforpolitics.org/crystal ball, you can sign up for our kind of work. When I first started in 2019, we would always, we would usually only do one issue a week, which would come out on Thursday morning. Now we have so much stuff to cover in politics. I think, really for the past few years, we kind of do a Wednesday issue and a Thursday issue now. So it's double the content, same price, it's free. So I think that's a good deal. And on Twitter at Coleman, I'm not on there as much as I used to be, but I still obviously try to keep up with everything and see what maps everyone's posting and that type of thing.
Right. So go follow him on Twitter. Go sign up for the Crystal Ball. I've been reading them again since 2016, and they provide some of the best analysis in the business.